Abram is talking to his wife, and he makes this suggestion to her. I want you to say that you are my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul will live because of thee. So that was his way out of a rather precarious position. Instead of just telling you the truth, this is my wife Sarah. She's also my half-sister. And one parent was different between the two of them. But other than that, the question remains for us, did Abraham lie? If you read this, read on ahead about 4 or 5 chapters, and you'll find that Abraham did it again. This time with a man by the name of Abimelech. Did Abraham die? Well, yes, he died, but did Abraham lie? What impact does that have on our concept of Abraham? Abraham's noted to be a child of, he's an example of being faithful to God all throughout the Old and New Testament. I would have to say, yes, he did. He lied, because a half-truth is still a lie, as long as it's meant to deceive, and that's what we got here, deception. He and Sarah had the same father, but they did not have the same mother. Half-sister, yes. Wife, yes. But why did he say, I want you to say this, so both of us will be better off? First of all, I would say this man's faith in God was not what it should have been. I'm talking about Abraham. It's not what it should have been. If God had done all these other things, then surely that same God could be trustworthy to handle the situation. Secondly, he jeopardized the safety of Sarah. Let's suppose they'd gone through with that situation, that disguise, that made-up agreement they had between them. And then it gets to be nighttime, and he said, it's time to go to bed. Come on, Sarah. Does it have any application for us today? Why are we studying this anyway? God did not, as far as I can tell, excuse his lie. But the fact is, God had to intervene in that situation. He couldn't allow that to happen. And so God intervened. What Abraham needed to do was repent. He's a human being like everybody else. Have you ever done anything wrong? Have you ever told a lie? Even a little white lie. Why is it that we keep using that expression? Somehow that diminishes the guilt, I suppose. So we tell little white lies. He needed to repent. And possibly that's what's meant in Genesis 13. Look at the next chapter, verses 3 and 4. As they go forward, we'll see here in just a minute, they went unto the place of the altar they had made there and near Bethel. And notice that there Abraham called on the name of his Lord. I would like to think that this is one thing that he did. Ask for forgiveness of sin. He called on the name of the Lord. But that's about as close as I can get to answering that situation. Comments or questions you might have? just because somebody else does something that's wrong, does that give us the right to do it also? I mean, there are a lot of lessons that can be gained from this situation. And it was one that I don't think either one of them, Abram or Sarah, wanted to be a part of it, but that was their temporary solution, and he made it in haste. Yes, he told a lie. I believe that he also asked forgiveness, and God was willing to forgive and forget. Okay, we're going to be starting here in Genesis chapter 14. I'm going to go rather fast because I'm simply laying the groundwork for what we started with last Lord's Day. We have some kings all of a sudden here in this chapter that are mentioned. I'm not going to go in and try to pronounce all of them. You can do as well as I can in the pronunciation of the kings. But notice that these kings, verse 2, included a man by the name of Bera, who was of all places, he was the king of Sodom, a city-state, we'll say. So, those kings that are mentioned in verse 1, along with their chief, he seems to be the leader of the group, Kedorlaomer, add Tidal to the nations that had formed a confederacy, probably for their own safety. But it was during this time that Abram was up in Mamre, M-A-M-R-E, evidently living a life soulless. He didn't have much of a problem with those around him until we get to chapter 14. Notice, starting in verse 3, these kings that are mentioned in verse 1 joined together in the Vale of Siddim. And that's called the Salt Sea, or we know it more recently as the Dead Sea. And they were joined together there at Siddim. 12 years they served Kedorlaomer. For 12 years. In the 13th year, they had enough. They decided that's it. Well, what's he talking about? They were paying tribute. These 5 city-states. You can remember 2 of them, Sodom, Gomorrah, along with Admah and Zeboim, and then also include in that Zoar, Z-O-A-R, 5 cities that we have. And they sort of use it, we use the term formed a confederacy. That is, you get a number of people that are willing to go along with you and they're allies. A-L-L-I-E-S. They're your ally. You are confederates together. So that's what we have, and we don't have, probably this one chapter is about it as far as what they were accomplished. They loved to fight. They took a lot of land, and far back in history I can go, that was a problem. Land, any land out there that seemed to be sort of in chaos and without a leader, they jumped on the situation, and these 5 kings were having things to go their way. Then it said in verse 4, chapter 14 and verse 4. 12 years they served this, well, he's the leader of the renegade group. They served him, and in the 13th year they said, that's it, we're through. Why? Because once they had taken them captive and beaten them down, and they admitted, all right, you're stronger than we are, and he began to say, look, they're all these kingdoms are mine. They are going to have to pay tribute. What does that mean? They're going to be paying exorbitant taxes. And it was all going to him and those other kings that were with him that been taking over like dominoes falling. They would have one nation, or a little city-state actually. They'd take it, go on, and just like a bunch of army ants, getting rid of yards. So, in the 14th year, says verse 5, those kings, along with their leader, smote these other places. And verse 7 says, when they finished in that group of battles, they came to this Eshmishpat, and then to Kadesh. That's about the only name that I recognize. There was a Kadesh Barnea. Later on will come up against that one, so remember that name. Verse 8, there went out the king of Sodom, who was who? That was Bera, king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, Zeboim, and then Bela. But notice, Bela was simply the same thing as Zoar, says the Bible. Why is this important now? Because an incident is going to happen in the next few chapters involves Zoar, that city. God was going to destroy all of these evil nations. And when God told Lot about it, Lot said, please, instead of, how about sending us to Zoar? Don't destroy all the cities. How about just let us go to Zoar and be safe there? You're going to read that a little bit later. Here's what we're dealing with now. The more or less the taking of property, just one right after the other. Okay, they've been paying their taxes for 13 years, and then they rebelled. Periodically, we have people rebelling against paying taxes now. I can understand why in some cases, but you know the Bible does say that we're to pay our taxes, right? Romans chapter 13. Okay, let's go on to verse 5. Genesis 14, verse 5. In the 14th year, they came Chedorlaomer and along with these other people. And when they finished their work, verse 7 says, they returned, they came to this place, which is Kadesh, we'll see about later. Notice the Amalekites were there. There's a name you want to remember for future reference. And then verse 8 says, the king of Sodom and Gomorrah, those two plus all of these others, in other words, five of these city-states decided, let's band together and stop this Chedorlaomer. Let's stop him from just coming and taking all of our homes and our land and our crops and our stock. Let's form our own little union to fight them. That's what that is about. And then look at verse 9. I read the last 4 words of that verse, and I thought, what in the world is he talking about? 4 kings with 5. We'll add it up. There were 5 kings that rebelled. 4 were with, 3 were with Kedorlaomer, who were doing all of the taking of land. So you got 5 kings and 4 kings. And therefore, that's what he means. 4 kings having a battle with 5. And the war, the vale of Siddim, was full of slime pits. Why bring up all of this information? Well, that's because it's not a made-up story. And the inspired writer, probably Moses, but the inspired writer wants to tell it like it is. I thought it was interesting, but some of the points that were made are quite interesting for people today. This is one of them. This vale of Siddim, where the fight was going to happen, was full of slime pits, or I have another version that I was reading this morning, full of tar pits, T-A-R. You know, if I was reading that, and I happened to be the CEO of Phillips organization, Phillips 66, or maybe Sinclair, I would say, wait a minute, what did you just say? A place that was full of slime pits? Where was this? There would be definite interest. Why? Because when you've got slime like this, and the purpose of it just raw, untreated, unmanufactured, you could use that for sealing. Put up your log house and seal and keep out the weather. Anyway, there's a lot of slime pits or tar pits there. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fell. They decided to take off. I think what they probably did was hide somewhere in this slime pit area, because there were a number of caves and so on. And so verse 12 says, and they who? This little fellow with the long name, Kedorlaomer, they took Lot. Now that's not just a small side issue, that's a big deal. They took Lot, Abraham's brother, or son, but rather it's his brother's son. They took Lot, who dwelt in Sodom, and they took his goods. So after routing all of those that would stand in their way, this confederacy called and set up by Kedorlaomer, they turned their attention to the 5 cities on the south in the Negev. So now this fight is going to be some kind of a battle. They joined with them in the vale of Siddim, beat them decisively, so that the kings in Sodom and Gomorrah fled. They decided they were going to rebel, all 5 kings in their small city-states, and they didn't make it. Oh, some of them ran away. I will read about one of them here in just a moment. But they gathered up all their possessions of the city that they had vanquished. Notice the women, the wives, the women, the children, their stock. They took everything. Now, unfortunately for them, they took Lot. Why do I say unfortunately? Because for their sake, it would have been a lot better just to leave Lot alone. But they didn't. They took him with them. And so, evidently, this passage tells us that here is Lot. First, he pitched his tent towards Sodom. Remember that? And then he was in Sodom. And then we'll read that he sat at the gates of Sodom. I mean, that guy is getting to be rather, I don't know about Lot, he's getting to be rather important. Sitting at the gates meant being a leader, sitting there in the gates of the city where some judicial type activity was going on, judges and so on, rendering decisions. That's where Lot was. He sat at the gates. He was with the noble aristocracy of the people. And then God said to Lot, get out, because I'm going to destroy all of these people because of their wickedness. So, what's going through the mind of Lot? I imagine he had more on his mind than anybody on either side, because he's going to have to decide which way he's going. But anyway, Abram decided that he is going to put a stop to it. Why? Because this was about 1913, 1,913 years before the birth of Christ. Almost 2,000 years. Put Abraham pretty well would be the main individual during this time. So that's what we've got going. God is not going to allow Lot to be carried off by Kedorlaomer. He just didn't allow it. Verse 13, we have one of those first mentioned. And there came one that escaped from that fight between the 4 kings versus the 5 kings. One of them escaped, told Abraham the Hebrew. Oh, we need to stop there just a moment. First time the word Hebrew is ever found in the Bible, right here. Abraham is called the Hebrew. I think if you want to know where he came from, the best guess that we have, and even the scholars have no more information about it than you do, but I think that probably that man came from one that we've already had. His name was Eber, E-B-E-R. Probably he was the great-grandson of Shem. Noah, remember Noah and the flood, connected all together. Noah had 3 boys, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. This one is the great-grandson of Shem. So we're trying to connect these ages of the Bible together with each other. Now, he's called in verse 13 the Hebrew, Abraham the Hebrew. Probably that's done to distinguish Abram from the other inhabitants in the land of Canaan. They were going to be going ultimately into Canaan. There was your land of milk and honey. God had promised to bring them, but it was only after a number of ordeals like we've just been discussing that that's going to happen. Probably this guy is related then to Eber, who is related to Noah. This goes back all the way to the ark. That's where we are today. Okay, now, chapter 14, verse 13. He escaped and told Abram, Lot's uncle, that Lot had been taken captive. And so what does verse 14 tell us? Abram heard that his brother's boy was taken captive, and he armed his own servants. How many? Look how he even puts it down exactly. 318. That's how many people Abram got in this to go with him and do battle. And they were joined together, it says, in the vale of Siddim, verse 3. So there's the place, and now we got the individuals involved. Abram, probably by this time, was practically a king of his own little area where he stayed. At least he would be what we would call a tribal chieftain, a man of great honor and well respected by all that knew him. And this fellow that escaped from that Kedorlaomer, he escaped and he went straight to Abraham and said, Abram, your nephew Lot has been taken captive. He's been kidnapped along with his family and along with his stock and everything that he had. Remember, he was pretty wealthy by this time. He's going to lose it all a little later, but he was pretty wealthy about this time. And so these 318 men were trained in his household. They went to rescue Lot. There's some interesting war situations involved here. You have different generals, or commanders of war, and they all, we had General MacArthur and Dwight David Eisenhower. Both of these men are well known because of their fighting abilities and so on, and made generals. Well, he would be a small general then, Abraham would. But Abraham attacked, and look at verse 15. He divided himself against them. What does that mean? He divided himself. I think what it means is that he divided part of his army, and they were going to attack from this side. Another part of the army would go over here, and they're going to attack from that side. So he divided his armor, his people, his fighters up. And he made his attack. Abraham, they began to run. I wish we had our map, but probably a lot of you are familiar with the Mediterranean Sea and where we are here now. But remember the name Damascus? Yeah, that's where Paul, the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, hundreds of years later, was on the road to Damascus. Acts 9 and 22 and 26. He was on his way to this ancient city of Damascus, up in Syria. So this is north then of Jerusalem, north of where Israel was located, all the way to Syria. He attacked with 318 men. Probably the other side had a greater number of men, but the way that he attacked, and probably at nighttime in the dark, anyway, he was successful and routed the army, and they all fled. Abram pursued them. He kept chasing them all the way to a little bit north of Damascus. So he was a pretty good warlike creature. He recaptured his nephew, Lot, as well, and all of the things that they had taken, all the booty, the materials, what have you. He had all of it, and he came back. So Abraham was successful in securing Lot's freedom and bringing him back. Just another tidbit of information in the line of history, bringing us down to the time of Christ. In chapter 14, look at verse 17. The king of Sodom went out to meet him, Abraham. King of Sodom, we said, was Bera. Sodom and Gomorrah still exists at this time, people. Later on, you know what happens to Sodom and Gomorrah, chapters 18 and 19 especially. But here, it is still intact. They still had their leader. And he comes and he meets Abraham after he returned from the slaughter up there that they had when they went against this Kedorlaomer. And all the kings that were with him. And verse 18 says, and Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brought bread and water. He was priest of the Most High God. What? Where did this come from? Not a word has been said about Melchizedek before now. Then all of a sudden, we're in this story, and then here's Melchizedek. To me, it's fascinating. But this man was a priest of the Most High God. We've been studying in Wednesday night class here about this man, chapter 5 of the book of Hebrews, 6, and mostly chapter 7. We find out a lot about this fellow, but one statement that's made is quite interesting. We'll pick up just a moment. Note this. There is no record of all of these exploits that we had regarding this fight between Abraham and this Kedorlaomer. They don't have any records. Why? Don't know, but I think maybe the answer is look around. People of that day, when you find inscriptions such as the Elamite inscriptions and so on, ancient kings were accustomed to only talking about their own victories. They didn't take pride in their own defeats. They tell, like people today, often tell other people only what they want you to know. So that's probably the answer to this. You don't find this in secular history because they were defeated, and they were defeated badly. Abram didn't take the praise for being the general in this occasion because he knew good and well he had very little to do with it. God was the one that was behind it. Okay, verse 17 again, chapter 14, verse 17. Melchizedek, his name is brought up. He was king of Salem. It is thought that Salem simply is a prior name for Jerusalem. The word Salem means peace, P-E-A-C-E. He was the king of Salem. And he was priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him. And he said, blessed be the God, blessed be Abraham and the Most High God, and possessor of heaven and earth. And he blessed be the Most High God, which has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he gave him tithes of all. If this is all that we had, that one statement here, he gave him tithes of all. Who gave tithes to whom? We probably would still be arguing this if we didn't know what the book of Hebrews says by inspiration of God. But he gave tithes to all. This is a problem of, I guess, sometimes, I know I've run up against it. We're talking about using pronouns. Instead of using the name, let's say Felix or Paul, if you just use the pronoun and he and him, who did what to him? And so I remember when I was little, I did some reading on this. People were actually saying back in those days, when I was younger, that he gave Abraham tithes. But you don't worry about the pronouns when you get over to the New Testament, because it just bluntly says that it was Nebuchadnezzar that received the tithes, and it was Abraham who gave them. So this is not a problem. Take the New Testament, explains the Old. Now, he blessed the Most High God and gave him tithes. And the king of Sodom said to Abraham, we just captured all these people or killed them. Abraham's 318 men army was successful. They got the job done. And so now Melchizedek comes on the scene, in and out. And it was a quick in and out, we'll see. And he says to Abraham, give me the people involved and keep all the booty, the goods that you just found from this latest battle. Keep all the goods for yourself. Just let me have the people back. Abraham said, no, that's not the way it's going to be. We're in verse 22. Abraham said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up my hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth. And here's what my resolve is. I will not take a thread, even used as a shoe latchet. I'm not going to take anything that is thine, lest you would say, I have made Abraham to be what he is, rich. Abraham said, I do make this exception. Only the young men that have been taken, and the portion of the men that went with us, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portion. But I made a vow to God, I'm not going to just be a part of all this, and all of this booty and stuff comes for my benefit. Well, Melchizedek was king and priest of the Most High God. Let's talk about him just a moment, because he vanishes. Well, by that we mean, as far as the text is concerned, he's here and then he's gone. And that's even described by the Bible itself. I want to mention that. I want to get ahead a little bit here. Anyway, when we're talking about Melchizedek, he was priest after the Most High God. What kind of priest was he? Without father, without mother. Just a moment. Without a mother? What was he? The result of a miracle from God? And no, he had a father and he had a mother. But as far as his priesthood is concerned, we don't have any information. It's like he just popped up and then he was gone. It's not mentioned who was his father. It's not mentioned who was his mother. So that's, I think, the best explanation we can give to this man, Melchizedek, king of Salem. And then we'll leave him for a while. I got a note I took for myself. I thought this was interesting. Did you know that the Latter-day Saints today, who are better known as Mormons, the Latter-day Saints believe that the Melchizedek priesthood was lost after the death of the original apostles. But it was restored in 1829 by Peter, James, and John, who conferred, now I know, quite an imagination, but Peter, James, and John came back from the dead, supposedly, and conferred this Melchizedek priesthood upon Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery. I know you're going to have difficulty swallowing that, so you may ought to get you a little bit of water. It didn't happen. This is all made up. They found we can come up with another order, the Latter-day Saints thought, and we'll call it the Melchizedek order. That's because his mom and dad aren't mentioned. That's the same way it is with our Melchizedek priesthood. Today, they still claim to have the Melchizedek priesthood. Back to the story. Melchizedek received from Abraham 1/10 of all, is what the Hebrew writer says. 1/10 of the goods and so on. But this is the first mention in the Bible, not only of what we had a moment ago, this is the first mention of tithing, to give 1/10. So the king of Sodom, in the meantime, he has reappeared from the slime pits. He's come back, and he's the one that comes and tells Abraham about Lot being taken. He reappears. Abraham, though, refuses to take any goods from that fight that ensued. And he said, this is what the promise that I made to God that I would not do. Back to Genesis 15, verse 1. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, don't be afraid, Abram. I am thy shield, and your exceeding great reward. Now, notice here that he says, I am your shield. I am your great reward. Here, I don't know if this may be the first time that the I am is mentioned. We've talked about the I am a lot here in the last few months, primarily because of Jesus Christ, way out yonder in their future. He made it famous. He says, I am the light of the world, John 14. I am the way, the truth, and the life, verse 6. I am the door. I am the morning star. In fact, his very name is I am that I am. So here we have it again, way back early. Probably this is the first time that's used. Okay, 15, we'll pick up there next week. Thanks for your attention.
Anyone?